Hi, thanks for tuning in today to Front Porch Conversations. We're here at the Harmony Center this morning on a mild January day, but still inside and comfortable today. I'd like to introduce to you our guest today, and that's Russell Yoon. And thank you so much for joining us. Russell, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where were you born and where did you grow up?
Well, I was actually born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, although I don't really consider myself a Midwesterner. My parents were both from Hawaii and had finished graduate school in the Midwest and got teaching jobs there. So they were in Milwaukee for a very short period of time. I think I was a year old when we left there.
So you have no memories of that?
I have no memories of it. And I don't fare well in cold weather, so I don't. I guess having lived on the West Coast most of my adult life. But then I grew up in Honolulu. And after high school, went to the West Coast, spent most of my adult years in Los Angeles, 15, 16 years in Seattle, but mostly on the left coast, yeah.
And what was your education and where did you attend school?
Well, I was graduated from the University of San Francisco, and my major was the School of Business with an emphasis on human resources. Mm-hmm.
And have you used that as a career path?
Once I did. I really didn't like human resources, although I've actually had two careers. The first career was in the aerospace industry. And while in the aerospace industry, I finished college over a 5-year period, all at nights. And only spent the last year at University of San Francisco. So and my goal was to finish it quickly and do it without any debt.
Those are good goals.
Yeah.
And what has brought you and your family to Advent Christian Village?
Well, that's a long story. It's part of it is because we will be serving a mission in Thailand, and we were living in Los Angeles. My original plan was to retire, although I'm still working for my California employer. Mm-hmm. But I didn't want to go directly to Thailand from Los Angeles after selling our home. I knew I had to make an intermediate stop somewhere. So I'm thinking, where? Well, I'm close to retirement age. I'm 64. So, I have to apply for Medicare this year. And I wanted to be in a state that was, or declare my residency in a state that's more retirement friendly. So I chose Florida. The other thing is, knowing that I'm going to Thailand from living in the suburbs and close to the city, I wanted to live somewhere that was rural so I can kind of get used to doing without, if you understand what I'm saying. Another reason was we have a 10-year-old daughter, and Los Angeles wasn't the safest place for her to grow up, and I felt that this place would be very safe.
Had you been here?
Yes, actually last May, so May of 2021, I came through here with, do you know the late Dr. David Dean?
Yes.
Okay, his son Nate is actually my leader with Advent Christian General Conference. And he brought me here because we were considering buying his property right outside of the village. And I wasn't able to meet Craig Carter, but I met Karen Thomas and decided, this would be a good place for us to live as that intermediate stop, so to speak. So we moved in here in the 1st of September. But probably the main reason we came here is because neither my wife nor I feel that we were quite prepared for the ministry, because neither of us have any theological training. She's a relatively new Christian, and I thought, what a perfect place to be a mentee to all these retired pastors and returned missionaries from different countries. I have to mention Barbara White. She's kind of taken us under her wing and been our mentor. And she's just a wonderful person.
I was going to say, you couldn't find a better one.
Yeah, and I've connected with a lot of the missionaries here who've served in Asia and Southeast Asia. So it's been a great experience.
Good. Well, when you said you had to do without, you have to do without big traffic here, smog.
Yeah, a lot of things.
I'm not saying that critically. I'm just saying that a lot of people come here because of those things and the companionship and community.
That's part of it. Traffic doesn't bother me because the trade-off is everything's close. And I lived in a walking city where I was 5 minutes by foot to 5 different markets. Whereas here, it's a half an hour to the Winn-Dixie. So that's kind of what I mean. And the situation in Thailand will be fairly similar. You have to drive a ways. They have a Dollar General, so to speak, within the village where we'll be living. But it's kind of similar. And the other thing is the climate, because having lived on the left coast, yeah, I'm used to perfect weather. I'm used to 75 degrees all year round with 50% humidity. This weather is a little closer to what I'll experience in Thailand. Mm-hmm. And there's only somebody said there's only 3 seasons here.
What are those?
Well, summer and winter, I guess.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So, because I came in the hottest part of the year. It was probably in the mid 90s and very humid. Mm-hmm. So, I'm glad I kind of got a taste of that. Yeah.
Yes, humidity is something to learn about before you have to be there.
It definitely is.
Without air conditioning or whatever.
Right.
When you said your wife is a fairly new Christian, and what about you? When did your faith journey begin?
Well, that's an interesting question. See, my ethnicity, I'm a third generation Korean. All of my grandparents came from Korea at the turn of the century. So my parents were born in Hawaii when at the time it was a territory of Hawaii, so they were technically U.S. citizens. Most Korean Christians are Presbyterians, baptize the infants.
Right.
So I guess I'm also a third generation Christian, but it's the old saying, familiarity breeds contempt. I never really took it seriously. It was more of a social thing to me. It wasn't like being a first generation Christian where you have that moment, of transformation. I never really experienced that until, much later in life when God actually touched me. So.
Would you share a little bit about that experience?
Well, yeah, my walk with God was not all that close most of my life, although I kept coming back to Him. So, I've done some study on predestination, and I feel that I've been chosen. There's no doubt in my mind about that. I lived a sinful life. The only thing that really kept me in church was music. I tended to gravitate toward those mega churches with big orchestras because music was really my thing. I never really depended on it to make a living. It was more of an avocation. Mm-hmm. But I was pretty serious about it. I was a brass player, and I was a card-carrying union member at one point. So I've played some good gigs. Mm-hmm. But now that I look back at it, it was really like idolatry in a sense, because I definitely put that before God. Well, one day in 2014, I woke up one day and wasn't able to play, and I couldn't figure out why. I just, I was no longer able to sustain the facial muscles necessary to play a brass instrument. Mm-hmm. And I went to acupuncturists, I went to therapists, no one could diagnose it until I found a Facebook website and I realized that I have this condition called focal dystonia. So dystonia is like, you see people that, have uncontrollable muscles like this. Well, focal means one part of the body. In my case, it was my face. Violin players can get it in their fingers. They think they're pressing down one string and they completely miss it. And it's caused by repetitive motion. And only 0.5% of musicians get this, and I was the lucky guy. So I think it was a way that God took me out to the woodshed. I really do, A few months later, my brother passed away, and he was 67 years old, which in our family is odd because most of us lived into our late 80s, 90s, So I thought, I've got a lot of time left. And that was a really dark year for me because I did a lot of soul searching. I started to, think about my own mortality. I remember what my doctor said when I turned 50 years old. He said, son, you're at the point now where all the warranties have expired, and the best thing you can hope for is one health issue at a time. And I'm thinking, wow, is this starting to happen to me? So I really started to think about it, and I got a little closer to God at that point in my life, and then realized I wanted to share my life with someone. So I'm kind of leading into how I got married. So anyway, didn't really want to get married because, I tried that before. It didn't quite work for me. But I did want to have a child. But what adoption agency is going to give a man in his 60s a child, So I thought, well, maybe I'll get married. And I started thinking about international women. So long story short, met my wife online, met some wonderful friends who are expatriates that helped us with the translation because we could not communicate at the time. and fell in love with my wife's daughter, whom I eventually adopted. So the rest is kind of history.
Tell us about your wife and your daughter.
Well, she's from Nakhon Phanom, Thailand, which is in the upper northeast, in an area called the Isan. And it's a pretty big area. It occupies about a third of Thailand's entire landmass. And it's right, if you remember from the Vietnam War, it's the upper right-hand corner of the country. The border countries would be Laos, Vietnam, and then Cambodia. Mm-hmm. So it's right there. She first heard the gospel when she was in 3rd grade. And in fact, the mission that we'll be serving is called Christian Mission Ban Narachakwai, which I know that's a mouthful. We're going to call it CMN.
Okay, good.
Okay, here and after. So she got some exposure to that mission, early in her life. And I guess the first time she actually heard the gospel was in the 3rd grade, because some missionaries actually came to her school. And by the way, the mission leader was my wife's former 3rd grade teacher, so that's kind of the connection.
A long connection.
Yeah, it is a long connection. Yeah, and she came from generations of Buddhists. So the conversion's not easy when you consider that Thailand is about 98% Buddhist. Christians represent, I think I did the math, 0.002% of the population, at least in that area. So very, very few. So those people are. They need the Lord, and they're lost.
So there's a big field to work in there.
Oh yeah, huge. Yeah, in fact, that area is probably it's usually targeted by at least one mission agency at a time, but it's the most unevangelized area in the country.
Is there a Bible in their native language?
Yeah, there is, and actually, the main language in Thailand is called Central Thai. That's what's taught in the schools. They have the Thailand Bible Association, which creates their Bible. I'm going to call it, let's call it like the Thai version of King James, so the complicated one. They also have a simpler version. But where my wife is from, the Isan area, they actually have their own dialect. So if you were to speak to someone that speaks Central Thai, let's say from the major city Bangkok, right? It's about 70% the same. So I would liken it to a guy from the Bronx talking to a Cajun. Something like that. But
there might not be much connection.
Yeah. I'll have to learn both dialects. So pray for me, because yes. At my stage of development, that's not an easy task.
And then what will you be doing let's talk about your daughter again first.
Okay. Daughter, her Thai name is Tanisha, but we call her T, so like Tee. Mm-hmm. Which is great. That's kind of her American name, and that's sort of her identity. Great kid, very sweet child, very motivated when it comes to school. She's been in the States for 3.5 years, a little over 3.5 years, and her English is very fluent, to the point where I can homeschool her now. Her mother will not let her forget the Thai, but the grandparents are now telling her, you sound like an American speaking Thai. So she's kind of starting to lose that. So the reality is, when we go there, I'm going to continue with the homeschooling, but also probably put her in a supplemental, Thai class, so she can understand the culture and stay current with the language. But we're very close. I kind of wish there were more children here, but she gets around. I don't know if you've seen her around church, but she participates with the children's group, and she sings, and she goes to the Camp Suwannee every Thursday with Pastor Randy. And
oh, good.
Yeah, we do. She's in week care right now, so yeah.
And your wife is working here at the village?
She works here at the village. She works at the Good Samaritan Center as a baker.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she's really enjoying that. She has some experience. She comes from a farming background, but she has restaurant training, so that worked out. And she loves it there. She loves the people, and I'm just pleased that her English, after just a short period of time, is strong enough to where she can actually communicate with people at work. So,
well, I'm sure they're happy to have her there.
Yeah. She's very thankful too.
A good baker is a popular person.
Well, she was never really a baker before, and I'm not so sure that they're doing things they're cooking things or baking things that you see like in a regular bakery, but it's more cafeteria style baking. But she enjoys it.
Good. When you are talking about how to prepare for your new assignment, what other things do you think are a part of that development for you?
Well, it's funny you ask that, because 4 years ago, when I felt, actually the calling came on Christmas Day of 2016. I was visiting my wife, wanted to go to church on Christmas Day. The only thing available was a Catholic church, big Catholic church in the city. And I thought, well, that's all there is. I guess that's what I'm going to have to do. And then my wife says, I have someone that wants to meet you. She introduced me to the director of CMN. And we had lunch there, and there was a couple of young ladies who started back with Dr. John Middlewood, when he started the mission, I'm going to say around 2005, thereabouts. And they were at the time students, English majors at the local university, and they've since graduated. So I stayed in touch with them, and I thought, I want to serve this church in some capacity, but I didn't know how. I couldn't even spell missionary at the time, So I got home, kind of did some research, found this person in New Zealand who was connected to them, at least by their websites, named Ernie Shack. And he's also affiliated with ACGC. And he says, well, I'm not really the person to talk to. So he got me in touch with Jeff Walsh, and then the rest is kind of history. I've since, I don't have any real theological training. So I took this basic course called Perspectives. It's kind of a basic course for missionaries that without any experience. And I learned a lot, made some connections, actually found a Thai language school that I will be going to when I first go to Thailand there. Took classes on fundraising, working on what they call a second language acquisition course. It's not a language teaching class, but it basically teaches you your tongue how to work and make sounds that you're not familiar with. So.
And you were explaining to me earlier that you're not going as a paid missionary.
No, we're called independent affiliated missionaries, meaning that it's not our intent to raise funds, for our personal support. Although I will be doing fundraising for the church. So we may have to build a church building there, a replacement church building, and they just need a lot of help. So that's something that I'll probably do on my own. The mission is presently funded 100% by the Penny Crusade.
And that's something we hear a lot about here at the village.
Right.
And you want to just mention that for our viewers who aren't familiar with it?
Yeah, sure. Well, Advent Christian has what they call the Penny Crusade, and it's kind of a general fund for donations that fund ministries like CMN. And I encourage you to give.
And their monies go to places around the world as well.
Yes, yes. We're part of the Asia Pacific region. So there's three. There's Asia Pacific, and then there's Europe and Africa, and then there's the Latin states.
And I know the village, generally, it looks like they're very generous each year with their donations.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, very much so.
What has your daughter come to realize about the biggest difference in her early years, or does she have enough memory of that yet, and living here, or living in the United States?
Oh, she loves it here. I mean, if you were to ask her, do you like Thailand or U.S. better? Within a split second, she's going to say, oh, it's America. There's no doubt. Although she's willing to go back, but our original plan was, I actually considered retiring there, because we bought some land, and we built a retaining wall, and we raised the elevation, getting ready to build the actual structure. But now we're thinking that maybe after a 5-year period, we'll come back. So, and it's my hope for her to graduate from an American university. And Florida's a perfect place. A lot of great schools here.
There are.
Yeah.
And the state just above us, that's where I graduated.
Georgia.
Georgia. Big day for Georgia, football-wise tonight.
Right.
What would you share with people who are thinking about ministry when they never had thought about it before?
Be prepared for change. Be prepared for the unexpected. I've done a lot of research on Thailand. I've spent some time there. But what I envision and what's in my mind is when I actually get there in reality, it's probably going to be much, much different. And pray a lot.
Do you have family still living in the United States?
Well, both my parents are deceased, and I mentioned to you, and my brother. I do have a sister who's 14 years older than me who still lives in Los Angeles. That's about it.
And people who've known you a long time, does this surprise them? about this new chapter in your life?
Surprised, some even shocked. You?
When you think of what it's going to take to get there, you already have travel plans, or you know how you're going?
Well, there's still a fair amount of uncertainty. Probably the biggest thing is my wife has a 10-year green card, so she has the right to live and work in the United States. And it took us almost 5 years to the day to reach that status. And of course, COVID created a lot of delays. But once she's out of the country for 6 months, she'll lose that. Oh. And it's going to make it difficult to come back. So we're going to have to get her U.S. citizenship before we leave. So that's one major obstacle, because we have no control other than paying the fees and filling out the application. We have no control over, when that's going to happen. The other thing is the country's pretty closed right now. It's because of COVID. They don't have the quality of vaccines that we have here, nor is it as available. Mm-hmm. Schools are closed down. CMN was closed for the last 5 months. It just reopened a couple weeks ago.
Wow.
So it's difficult there.
What
right
is
now.
the size of that school, or the range?
You mean CMN?
Yes.
Mission?
Uh-huh.
There's, at its peak, probably 50 people, but most of them are children, ages 5 to about 14, 15, thereabouts. And then there's a group of maybe 6 young ladies who are being groomed for leadership roles. They also give scholarships. But, it's kind of sad in the sense that, it's still very Buddhist there. Mm-hmm. So you could drive by there on any given Sunday and the place is a ghost town. And you think, why? Well, there's some Buddhist event in town. That's where the families take them. So, one of the things that, that we'd like to do is try to get to the heads of the household,
And is it fairly, it's not a maternal society or leadership in the family? Is it the male-dominated leadership?
Pretty much. Although I've been told by other Thai missionaries that they've been very successful when they can convert the mother first. It depends. Now, speaking from my wife's family, it's definitely a male-dominant home.
Mm-hmm. Russell, in your planning, you think you can plan for a lot of things, but there will be obstacles, and you've identified some of those already. Would you share those with us? Okay.
Well, probably the main one is, as I mentioned earlier, it's 98% Buddhist there, and the remaining 2% is Christianity. There's a handful of Muslims there. I was really surprised when I first got to Bangkok airport the very first time. I saw a lot of Thai women walking around with head coverings. I'm thinking, this is really strange. So I did a little research on the numbers and realized that they have a strong presence there. And within that 2%, you've got Christians and then all the different sects. There's Catholicism there. There's the LDS Church, the Mormons have been there. I believe the Jehovah's Witnesses, quite a few. But it's not easy. There's one area called Chiang Mai, and that's in northern Thailand. It's close to the China border, where it's actually 10% Christians. And the reason for that is that well over 100 years ago, European missionaries went there and helped them build an infrastructure and brought the gospel to that city. So 10%, that's huge.
That is.
In fact, I mentioned earlier, Thailand Bible Society is in Chiang Mai. Most of the missionaries that I talked to from Thailand are from that area. And they told me what a challenge it will be in the Isan area, because they visited there and they say that's an area that tends to resist the gospel. It's not easy to find converts there. And as I mentioned earlier, it's targeted by at least one mission agency, but it's the most unevangelized area in the country. The language is going to be, it's not like learning Spanish where they use the same alphabet, right? The Thai language has, I believe, 44 consonants and 29 vowels that are interspersed in the consonants to change the sound. And their alphabet is close to the Indian Sanskrit.
Okay, I wondered if it was more characters.
Yeah, it's close to the Indian Sanskrit. So it's not like Chinese, Japanese, or a lot of the Asian countries. And I'm going to need to learn that in order to communicate. I mean, it's one thing to order a pizza, but it's another thing to talk about the gospel. So that's something, that's definitely on my prayer list. And then learning the second dialect for that area. So that's one thing. Another thing is there's a lot of skepticism there. Going in there in ministry, a lot of people will perceive that I'm doing this for a profit. So, one thing that I'm planning to do is sort of identify as an English teacher / apostle and actually work in the public schools. So it's kind of my hope to become, they call them special English teachers, because most of the English is taught by Thais that, became English teachers. But they want someone that with a native tongue so they can hear the correct pronunciations. So I hope to do that, maybe for compensation, maybe without. I may even go into maybe the schools that don't have the funding for English programs and take it there and use that as outreach for the church. So that's one thing. That's a pretty strong draw. English is kind of the cool language that everyone understands, but not a lot of people are really motivated to learn it. But those who take it seriously tend to go to the big cities like Bangkok and get much better jobs.
Sure.
That's just a fact.
Now, will you have any problem getting visas or being able to move?
Visa shouldn't be a problem. Now, if I get a job teaching in the public schools, I'll get some assistance from the Thai government. But the reality is I'll probably go on what they call a retirement visa, where you have to prove that you've got X amount of dollars in a savings account, and then you pay annually for your visa. I don't think there's any way I'll ever get Thai citizenship. It's not like here. It's not like here at all. And then, of course, my daughter automatically became a U.S. citizen. She has a U.S. passport now, after I adopted her. There's a law that was passed some 20 years ago that would make her instantly a U.S. citizen. For my wife, it's a little different story. She's going to have to go through the naturalization process. So we've got that. What else? Well, challenges. Again, that perception. When I go to the marketplace, they have food for sale, whether it's prepared or even just like fresh vegetables. And if it has a price on that, that's for people like me that don't speak the language, because the Thai people, they barter and they get a special price. So we call this dual pricing. There's a term called phalang. It's spelled F-A-R-A-N-G. So the R has a little trill to it, phalang. A lot of Thai people think that means a white Anglo-Saxon person, but it means any foreigner, regardless if you're there permanently or however long you've lived in Thailand. You're this phalang, and there's the Thai national price, and there's the phalang price. And we've had some bad experiences. Like I mentioned that we bought some land and I built a retaining wall. We paid for that retaining wall 3 times.
Oh my goodness.
And the first 2 times they were actually built by my wife's, some of their closest friends and family built that, and they took advantage of her because she's married to a phalang. So I'm going to have to deal with that perception. And that's a big one.
It is.
In fact, when I go, and it's interesting because if I were a white person, they'd assume I'm a phalang, but I have an Asian look, right? So they kind of assume I'm a Thai until they realize I can't respond to them.
Open your mouth.
Right. So my wife says, just stay quiet so I can get the Thai price when we're in the market.
Russell, this has been really wonderful talking with you today. And I would bet that one of the things you would ask our viewers is to pray for you and your mission and your family.
Yes, please. And I think you heard my long list of prayers. So
thanks a lot. And thank you for tuning in to Front Porch Conversations.